I said something snotty with the Brexit before, but I'm going to expand a little on it. There's a broad narrative in British history. There's a long struggle against Roman colonization, and has worked itself out through religion, culture, science, language. It's very broad. The Romans won quite a few battles, but have never really managed to win the war. Britain has adopted ideas from the Romans, but it has largely managed to resist Romanization in a way that is unique in Europe. Sweden, for example, has also resisted Romanization, but it was never actively sought after by Roman civilization the way that Britain has been. The British have truly singularly succeeded in fighting the Romans off. And sometimes the Romans had to fight off the Romans and their allies, the Scots. In the process of its long struggle against Roman colonization, Britain eventually emerges a colonial power into its own. This allowed it a level of financial power that allowed it to eclipse Roman civilization. The Romans never fully submitted either, and so we had this flip. In the end of the Second World War, left both the Romans and the British under control of a common occupier, who did something remarkably British. It's very, very British. My R's aren't coming there. It's very British. I'm actually not very good at it. It's all only in Canada, eh? It's a pity. You won't get that. Okay, they drew arbitrary lines on maps that ignored thousands of years of history solely for their own interests. NATO exists for American strategic purposes. The EU exists to strengthen the NATO alliance, but the boundaries drawn on the map ignore the historical reality that Britain is defined by its opposition to Roman colonialism. There would be no Britain if it wasn't for the fight against Rome. The alliance is inherently unstable because it ignores the historical facts. We don't talk of the situation like this because we're taught to see imperialism through the lens of racial dominance. The Europeans are white, so they are our allies and not our subjects. But the collapse of the EU is fundamentally not different than the collapse of the Sykes-Picot Line. It's drawn out of similar historical forces at play and out of imperial ignorance. Imagine, after Waterloo, that anyone would fancy that the Americans might come and put the British and the French in the same economic zone, along with the Germans. It's madness. I mean, do we need 100 years wars? Like what is the? It made no sense. Okay, I know. It's shocking to us because we're so used to this, right? But the actual reality is that the Entente Cordiale, notwithstanding, an alliance between England and France to begin with, and then France and Germany. It's like God showed up in a Shakespeare film or a Shakespeare play and said, okay, you guys are all going to get along now. And that's the end of it. The alternate ending to Hamlet that was never published was that, everybody just shook it off and they were great friends afterwards. It's hard to see it. I acknowledge that. It's hard to see how insane the EU really is in the longer lens of history. And, people will look back on this one day and just shake their heads and say, that American hegemony must have been something else. It may seem as though the world cannot go back to how it existed in 1933, but a closer analysis should reveal that the British Empire does still exist. It's called America, and that its capital was moved from London to Washington. What the Americans called the Revolutionary War should be viewed through the long lens of history. Again, we're talking, this long lens of history. You know, when we're centuries ahead of our time, we can see things through the long lens of history. You should be able to see it too. Maybe you can. You just need a little bit of a poke. You know, poke. Remember what was it? Was it ICQ that, or was it even Facebook with the poke? Yeah, you push the button and it would degauss your screen. Anyways, you should be able to see that. You should. But what the Americans call the thing you should be able to see is that what the Americans call the Revolutionary War should be viewed through the long lens of history as a civil war between factions of the Anglo-American Empire, and to pry the homeland free from the Romans is not granted any meaningful kind of independence. So what is Brexit? Like, are we talking about British independence? The Brits have declared independence from the Empire? What? It's largely a false choice, right? The people of Britain think that they can declare independence from Europe. They certainly cannot declare independence from America, which would be declaring independence from themselves. It's a small country, okay? It really is a very small country. It has an inflated GDP due to its financial sector. And that might go away now. It can hardly go it alone. No one would want to. Wouldn't truly want to. The ignorant masses, and, you know, this side of the, Thatcher Revolution, they really are ignorant. That's the story here, is how ignorant they are. The idea of an independent Britain is absurd. The choice that it has is between being a province of Rome, which it doesn't like, or being a province of Canada, which is a province of itself. In fact, that might make more sense. My snarky comment was something to do with Oceania. Say goodbye to Eurasia and hello to Oceania. But what is Oceania really? It's the British Empire. Should the British not be a part of their own empire? It should be viewed less as a breaking apart and more as a coming home. Like Justinian re-entering Rome. And I found this tickled my fancy. Do you know who that is? I'll give you a hint, I just said it. That made me laugh. If you're a history nerd, then you'll get the joke. I can't. This is one of those jokes that you get or you don't. I like to narrate things and I like to write essays, but this would be more like I need to write you a book before you got the joke. I'm sorry. I hope you get the joke. I do. I dearly, from the bottom of my heart, I hope you get that joke. It would bring me great joy and happiness. But I just if you can't, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to read up on Justinian, because it would take me far too long than is reasonable to explain the joke to you. So to follow up on that, it's an article here from the World Socialist website. published by the International Committee of the Fourth International. What is this communist bullshit, right? Yeah, this is communist, all right. These are the Trotskyists. These are the ones that the bad communists went after. Which, I mean, they weren't that good though either, but Stalin had this guy killed eventually, after he disappeared to Mexico for a little while, escaped, and he was turned into a scapegoat for all the horrible things that happened. It's actually it's the surreal part of history, regarding the Soviets. The part that's hard to actually believe happened, but it did. And Trotsky was that guy. A little better. Well, I mean, it's not hard to be better than Stalin, right? There's an election, campaign slogan for you. Vote for me. I'm better than Stalin. Hey, I think that we all want our elected representatives to be better than Stalin, don't we? It's not hard to be better than Stalin, so suggesting, it's not much of a praise, right? He had the whole, dictatorship of the proletariat thing. He was still, on pretty much on the same side as Lenin. So he's talking about all the bad stuff there. It's just, in comparison, right? And it's also one of those, kind of great parts of history, right? Because we know what happened when Stalin took over. We don't know what would have happened had Trotsky taken over. And there's some kind of ironic twists in there, for example. Like, could Trotsky have beaten Hitler? On the other side of that, though, is that you'd ask well, I was gonna say, would they have sent Hitler after Trotsky? And they probably would have. In fact, they probably went after him in the first place, right? Yeah. Sorry, just enjoying my coffee there. Anyways, so I got this article here about the German foreign minister distancing himself from the United States. Might the Germans declare independence? They can. Might the Americans colony with the solar energy? I guess the Germans couldn't have a colony in the sun, so they became the colony with the solar energy instead. Again, I hope you get that, but I can't. We can't go through, the theory of everything here. It's just okay. That doesn't actually work into the theory or any theory of everything I know. And obviously there could not be multiple theories of everything. Sub-theories. Well, there's multiple string theories. Different. Yeah, I suppose there would have to be multiple theories of everything because there would have to be different variables, right? I'm digressing. Have I explained the Trotskyists? If you're looking at it from a distance, you might think the Trotskyists are better than the other Marxists. Yeah. They really aren't, except in one way. And these Trotskyists, right, they're not the historical Trotskyists, they're the writers of the World Socialist website and the Fourth International peoples there. They're really good at analyzing foreign policy, these particular Trotskyists. The reason for this is that they have no interest in the propaganda at all. They don't. And they're almost unique in it. They don't dissect it, they don't dance around it, they don't counteract it, they just simply ignore it. The propaganda just does not exist. And that Marxists are kind of usually good at that. The problem, See, Marxists are usually really good at getting rid of the Western propaganda. The problem is that they have their own propaganda, and their own propaganda is usually even more ridiculous, right? This is the problem with reading Russian news, right? I know the Russians aren't Marxists, but they they have a when the communists went away, in Russia, they didn't, the media didn't, it didn't transform itself through, the revolutionary dot dot dot. It's still the media that was there before, right? So there's still shades of things that, aren't so good. And so when you're stuck in this situation, like, are you going to read, the Western propaganda is bullshit, right? The Russian stuff's hard to, because you're native with the Western stuff, you know how to dissect it, you know how to, you at least, you might not always know what's actually happening, but you can at least usually pick out when it's bullshit, right? So, for example, when they had they seem to have stopped doing it, but and I think it was the U.S. Central Command was posting videos of hitting targets in the Middle East, and they claimed they were ISIS targets, right? But you looked at them, and they were like obviously Syrian military bases, right? It was like the most obvious thing in the world that they're bombing Syrian military installations, and then they're posting videos on the internet and saying, "Look, we're bombing ISIS." Really, ISIS has tanks in a barracks? When did ISIS get around to building barracks? But I don't know exactly what that is, right? It could be that ISIS took over the barracks. It could be that they're bombing it, that they bombed it first and then the people came in afterwards. Like, you can, what, it's not exactly clear what I'm looking at, but I know that what I'm not looking at is, bombing isolated targets in a backwater in the desert, right? They were obviously military targets that were created by a military. And so this is the thing about the Western propaganda, right? It's not always clear what's actually happening, but it's usually clear when they're lying to you. You can pick out what's false. The Russians, it's harder to say, right? But the Trotskyists are great because they don't, right? Their propaganda consists of their bad theory, right? So they'll run through this big, long, essay, and it's a great essay, and it's a great deconstruction, brilliant analysis, and I should probably just actually give, rather than saying the Trotskyists, I should probably give credit to this. This is Peter Schwartz. I don't know any of their writers, okay, and I don't know if they wrote it or if it's written by the committee. If Peter Schwartz even exists, right, or if it's just a name that the committee made up, right? It's a fine German sounding name, right? It's the Volks. I don't know, right? But I don't think actually the Trotskyists would probably be not that far from that. It's more that's more Nazi thinking, but the Germans wouldn't. The Trotskyists wouldn't be that far from that, right? On that level, right? We don't need specious deductions from that, but yeah, they'll go through this great big long essay. It'll be brilliant, great analysis, and then at the end of it, it'll be like, but the only way to stop this is through a revolutionary, working class movement, and run by the Fourth International, and only Trotsky understands how to, and you read it, and you want to just. I've laughed more than once when I get to the end of the article, right? Because it's like, they post lengthy articles too, right? So you'll get through 10 pages of very well written arguments, and then at the end there's one paragraph that's just, total Mickey Mouse. The only solution is to to agree with our great prophet Trotsky. And it makes it, like I say, I've laughed more than once, but it's totally minimal, and it's almost like they're filling out a form, right? It's like copy paste. Send it to the committee. The committee, inserts the proper language, and then it comes back, right? Maybe there's like a picture of Trotsky on the front or something too. I don't know. But like that's it. That's the extent of it, right? We don't get any like Trotsky invented the internet stuff thrown in the middle of it, right? It was Stalin. If these were Stalinists, that's what they'd be pushing, right? It doesn't matter that Stalin died, before the moon landing, anyways. He still invented the internet, right? It was his idea. He wrote it down, right? And then that was interpreted through a complex series of mimes, which he had narrated on his deathbed. And hence, it was Stalin that invented the internet. And that's why they only have a certain type of porn that's allowed, that's approved. I'm very silly today, aren't I? This is somewhat of a catastrophe, but we're not stopping. We're moving right on to I think we're moving right on to Stalingrad. That's where we're going. The pearly gates. Okay. Where the hell was I? Yes. So they don't. Besides those sort of that little bit of lip service to their cult, they don't they ignore the Western propaganda and they don't really add any of their own in. It's just totally dour factual analysis that you just think you can't get anywhere. It's only remarkable because of how good it is. You would expect, it's a sad reflection on the state of analysis that it is so difficult to find. I mean, I don't know. I don't go through the foreign policy articles on JSTOR. I'm sure there's some. If you go to the right places, I'm sure you find some good analysis. But as far as accessible media for working stiffs, you really don't get much better than the WSWS. And I can. Trotsky and I may have some disagreements about the technicalities of things, but I'm not really going to push back too hard, with the idea that we need a working class revolt, because I'm down with that, right? Where was I before I went down this long, winding path, fell off the hill, rolled through the creek, had a concussion, woke up a week later. I'm not claiming that Brexit is a conspiracy by American secret agents to react to the rise of an independent Germany. I'm not claiming that. Touched finger to nose. Finger to nose. No, I'm really not. Honestly. I'm just pointing out that the rise of an independent Germany is the more important story here. And that international reactions to Brexit will be defined more by how the various actors are interpreting the new reality in Germany than by how they are interpreting the new reality in Britain. So I just posted this. What the hell is this article even about? It's about how there's a side of the German ruling class that would rather reorient itself to Russia, and how that side is ascendant in the inevitable shift in power. Merkel's been chancellor for a while now. One is not chancellor forever. Eventually there are turnovers of power, and it does seem as though the left is poised to take over. And when they do, the groundswell of anti-Americanism in Germany, which never went away, may be poised to take the Germans in a different direction. All the talks about Britain and Britain moving out, well, what does that mean? As mentioned, the British don't really have anywhere to go besides in the Empire, which they already are. And then the only reason why it really can make any difference is if the EU is fragmenting anyways, right? If the EU maintains itself, if the status quo maintains itself, then whether Britain is in or outside of the EU makes little difference because they're both inside the American Empire, right? It's just a redrawing of provincial boundaries inside of a broader scope. But if the Germans are moving themselves outside of the empire and taking the EU with it, then the question of whether the British are in a EU that is orienting itself more towards Moscow or outside of that EU and thereby still firmly within the the British American Empire is what the real question is, right? Brexit is going to have effect in Britain. It's going to have effects in the general area regarding trade and whatnot, but it's really not that big a deal unless the Germans want to bolt, right? That's the real story there. And then all of a sudden, the British disengagement from the continent has a much deeper geostrategic reality to it. Many months ago, when this referendum was proposed, I was a lot more explicit. I stated it very clearly. The British will not leave the Eurozone, the EU, the European Union, unless the Americans want them to. And the Americans will never want them to, unless they are worried that the Germans are about to fragment the Union. The exit polls were apparently wrong. Not a lot of attention has been drawn to that. Again, I'm not saying there's a conspiracy here or anything, but if you want a deeper read into this, I think that the deeper read is not just that the Germans are looking to go, okay, but that the Americans think they're serious about it. The results of referendums in Quebec, in Scotland, are probably not any more fair than the Democratic primary, to use a crude analogy, okay? The actual flat truth is that it probably doesn't matter what people voted for. What matters is what people, a small number of people, wanted them to vote for. What I said several months ago is still true today. That if the Americans have serious concerns about the Germans reorienting the Union to Moscow or leaving it altogether, then the Americans will pull the British out. And I do suspect that that's what actually just happened. What does that mean? It means the pound is dead. Long live Oceania. It means the dollar gets the spoils. And it means the euro loses. And what does that mean?